But if we go back to this notion that masculinity and femininity, both in body type and in inclination towards particular gender roles or jobs or sports, those kinds of things, represent a huge spectrum of inclinations. There, I think there's a huge dynamic change taking place. And we see it both across the board, from jobs that are acceptable to women now that weren't 100 years ago, participation in athletics, to, I would include in this the changing ideas about marriage. I would include in it the changing concepts of homosexuality, that despite the red states, there's been a sea change in our notion of who homosexuals are and what they do and what kind of lives they should live.
Anne, I take your point, but I want to distinguish two things and wonder how you think they interact. So you've argued in your book and elsewhere, and I find it convincing in many ways, something about the fluidity of, let's call it, biological sex, right? And then on the other hand, people talk about the cultural construction of gender roles. I mean, I don't know about the cultural construction of gender roles. I mean, I'm half convinced of that. But what follows does anything directly follow for the cultural construction of gender roles from the biological fluidity of biological sex? I mean, nothing. Does anything directly follow? I mean...
Well, in other words, if we go back to this panoply of positions, there are the determinists who say, look, the biological bipolar distinction means that we need to have a bipolar social distinction. And they could say, okay, so it's not quite bipolar, so we need a not quite bipolar social distinction. That's your point.
Yeah, right. I mean, or you could think, well, the social roles and the biological roles just float free of one another.
Yet intuitively, not being so strictly philosophical, there is a sense that, gosh, even if the bipolarity of sex breaks down, that does kind of open up the doors for the bipolarity of gender roles to break down. So let's see what our guest has to say about all that.
Well, I don't think constructed roles float free. That's one thing. Nor am I a biological determinist. And in fact, I prefer, and the work I'm doing now is aimed at trying to have us understand how there's a constant kind of co-production of the body and culture. If you're a biological determinist, you think the body is fixed and then culture is layered on top of it. In fact, I think that as little children, as we're acculturated into our male or female roles and interests, that's happening via changes in our nervous system, in our body, in our brain, so that that distinction between the body and culture, I think, breaks down.
I think that's a nice point. Why don't we let some callers into this conversation? First one up is Billy in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Billy.
Thank you.
What's your comment or question?
Well, I'm wondering, with all the laws being passed and the constitutional amendment being proposed to define marriage as between a man and a woman, what kind of can of worms is the conservative right opening up in terms of defining whether this, for example, a heterosexual couple, is he really 100% male? Is she really 100% female?
Yeah, you have to go...
the biological sex.
Yeah, that's a good question. You have to go back to the Olympics does this sex testing. You have to do that for marriage, and what do you think?
Well, the Olympics gave it up. They just couldn't make it work in any way that scientists or the athletes agreed with. These kinds of cases that your caller raises, though, are already in the courts, where you have the court trying to decide whether someone is legitimately a male or whether because they've had transsexual surgery, or whether in some cases the court says, no, that person has a Y chromosome, he's a male, even if he has been legally changed to a female, including his birth certificate. So this is a can of worms, and it's already actively being played out in our legal system at many levels.
Yeah, so the conservative right is they don't know what they're getting into.
But you've got people who object to the forms now that we have standard in many university and social and government practices, saying what is your ethnicity? They give you about 5 choices and other.
You can.
So, but the there's all kinds of ways that forms and laws can undermine the picture of people as blends of all different sorts.
Yeah, that's certainly true. You can join this conversation by calling 415-841-4134. We're talking with Anne Fausto-Sterling about gender and sex, the variability and multiplicity of all these things. We have a caller in the line now, Dave in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Dave.
Hi. I think there's something to be learned in thinking about sex from thinking about height. Now, nobody says you can't be 7 feet tall or you can't be 3 feet tall, but people who are 5 to 6 feet tall tend to fit in better and kind of do better socially and so on. And so I think when we don't take in somebody who's 7 feet tall and say, we're going to cut a foot off of your leg so you'll only be 6 feet tall, we tolerate them being 7 feet tall, but it's something they have to work with. It's kind of a feature of their lives. And I think the same thing can be said of sex characteristics that are not, how to put it, standard, I think is your word, that they present life challenges and something that the individual needs to work through.
Well, I think that's a very good point. I mean, height statistically clusters, and but as you say, between 5 foot and 6 foot these days. Didn't used to, and yet we deal with the fact that although there's a cluster, there's also an infinite number of possibilities. Good point.
What do you think, Anne?
Well, I think it's an interesting point because we also have structured our world. The height of water fountains, the height of the standard kitchen sink, the height of the toilet off the floor, based on that average height. Now, as for me, I'm 5'2", and I need a step stool in my kitchen because otherwise I can't use the top shelves in my cabinets. So this gentleman is right. I have to work with the fact that architects build houses for taller people than I am.
Yeah. I want to ask you, you mentioned in passing about being socialized into gender roles. And you said, and I want to explore your views about this a little bit more, you're not a biological determinist, and you're not one of the people who think that sort of culture floats entirely free of biology. I want to explore that a little bit more with you, because here's something that strikes me often in these conversations. I don't know a society without some kind of division of labor between this gender, the division of reproductive labor, the division of raising children, the division of providing for the community. Everywhere you look, there's some kind of division of gender labor, let's call it. And it seems to me that's not accidental. It has something to do with the kind of beings we are, the kind of biological beings we are. There's this kind of massive coordination problem that we face as a species. Men have to coordinate with men so as not to kill each other over the women. Women have to coordinate with women so as not to kill each other over the men. And men have to coordinate with women so that mates get assigned in a way that both will agree. And it seems that part of our whole kind of being in the world is designed to solve these coordination problems. So it makes it non-accidental that there's a division of labor.
It's very hard to figure out. You're absolutely right that there is a division of labor in most, if not all, cultures that we're aware of, but it's very hard to figure out why. And you can, for example, the roles that different groups play are different in different cultures, so it's not the same division of labor. So there are some fundamental things we know. Childbearing is one difference between most men, or all men, and most women. That is, not all women bear children, but no men do. And childbearing and how you then organize households around children might be one factor that leads to a division of labor. But clearly what the division of labor is not set. It's something that develops historically and changes historically.
I think I don't want to correct you, but I mean, our governor Arnold Schwarzenegger gave birth in one of his movies. Of course.
Oh well, this is true.
That may not have. I'll have to check on whether that was a documentary or fiction. Yeah. But in the meantime,
yes, and he is an amazing man.
He is an amazing man. We do have email from Kurt in Berkeley. It sounds like he's kind of supporting what Ken was saying. Something like, he says, if the standard binary codes for gender and sex aren't sufficient, what is the solution? Get rid of male, female terms and pronouns, Or can't we simply accept that there may be simply exceptions to justifiable rules? In other words, maybe we need to add a little box for other, like we do with the racial and ethnic characteristics, and learn to be more tolerant to these 1 to 2 to 3% of the people. But do we really need to change the way we look at everything?
The whole set of categories need to be reconfigured. What do you think, Ken?
Well, I think that we need to think about why we want to change categories. I don't know that we always have to, but there are some areas, for example, where maybe the categories don't make sense. For example, driver's license or passport.